Sometimes we carry a conversation long after it's ended. A word misheard, a silence misunderstood, a note that meant something different than we thought. This podcast is a place for those unfinished stories, the ones that linger, replay, and quietly ask, what if I could say one more thing? You'll hear stories inspired by real messages sent to me, moments of love, loss, regret, or revelation, and the conversations with the people behind them. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing. This story began with a short email from a man named Owen. He wrote, "It wasn't a love story. It was a translation problem that dressed up as one. Years ago, he fell in love with a woman who barely spoke his language. When she left, she wrote him a note. Just a few lines, and he thought he understood it. But years later, a new translation would change everything he thought he knew about what really happened and what she was trying to say. This is the translation that changed everything." The first time I told someone I loved them in Italian, I was holding a wedge of Parmesan like a talisman, the way pilgrims hold skulls. I had walked into the supermarket and, emboldened by the audacity of cheese, said to the woman behind the counter, "Ti amo." She laughed, crossed herself, and handed me a sample as though I had proposed marriage over a rind. I meant to say, "I love this," not "I love you," which is the curse of the American abroad. We are misguided romantics, believing the entire world is just a poorly punctuated love letter waiting to be signed. The real irony is that the one love I had in Italy required very little language and an alarming amount of trust. Her name was Anna, with an H that didn't sound like much, like a door barely opening. She wore the H like a secret. She was Czech, a violist, because of course she was. Nearly every tender disaster of my life involves either a musician or a weather event. And she had come to Trieste for a 2-month residency, a phrase that suggests an artist, an apartment with a view, and a steep learning curve with the wash machine. I met her on a bench along the Molo Dace, where the breeze lifts the seagulls into sermon and everything smells like salt and iron and the single bite of espresso your therapist warned you about. She was looking at the sea in a way that made the sea look guilty. I said, in my careful Italian, "It's windy." She said, in her careful English, "It is always windy in your city," and then smiled at me as if I had invented wind. People fall in love for dumber reasons. We dated, though the word dated here bears the weight of quotation marks that could crush a small animal. We walked, we ate gelato, we pointed at things and gave them wrong names. The longer we spent together, the more I suspected that the great majority of what we call communication is just choreography. Two people trying not to step on each other's toes while moving in roughly the same direction. When she said, "Your eyes are kindly," and then looked at me as if the word were a small pastry I might accept or refuse, I took her hand. It is possible to translate a lot with a hand. At restaurants, we let waiters decide for us. Due piatti, I would say, gesturing. 2 dishes, surprise us, play God. We'd eat whatever arrived and call it an adventure. The staff at our favorite osteria began to treat us like a private joke that softened into fondness. He is the bumbling foreigner, she is the alert bird. They make sounds at each other and laugh. You will ask the obvious. How did we talk about anything that mattered? My answer is both embarrassing and ordinary. Phones. We sat across from each other, the table a no man's land of breadcrumbs and olive pits, and we typed into a translation app that turned my idioms into meat paste and her poetics into IKEA instructions. I would wait as she typed, the 3 dots struggling like swimmers, and then her message would appear. Your company makes my body less lonely. I knew what she meant. Soul, spirit. And yet the choice of body felt thrillingly precise, as if loneliness were not an emotion, but a geography you carry around like a country folded into your bones. I saved it, the way you save a receipt that proves you were somewhere. She once wrote, "I wish to take your heart for a walk." Later, I learned that in Czech, the expression was less threatening and more like, "I'd like to go for a walk with your heart," which is still odd, but has fewer felony implications. What mattered was that we kept trying. We wrote, we gestured. I printed out verb tables and taped them to my fridge next to the magnet shaped like a sardine. She brought her viola over and played a phrase that said, "I miss you," and another that said, "I am careful by necessity." And one night, a phrase that said, "There are things that music cannot say, even when it is trying very hard." Then we turned off the lamp and, like saints and teenagers, believed touch would finish the sentence. There is a point in any cross-cultural romance when you begin to believe that translation is its own form of intimacy. Anyone can undress. Not everyone is willing to scroll, and there is courage in admitting, in the age of linguistic abundance, that you may never be fluent in the one person who matters. For all our bending toward each other, for all of our inventive gesturing and half-literal poems, we were still 2 people caught between the door and the hinge. If love is a house you build, we were forever huddled in the entry, unsure where the kitchen was. The misunderstanding that ended us arrived on a Tuesday, which seems cruel and bureaucratic, as though it punched in and out on its own little time clock. It was late October, and the Bora wind had arrived like some apostolic zealot, determined to cleanse the city of anyone insufficiently anchored. I was late to meet her. This was our joke, that I was on Owen time, which is to say endearingly, unreliable until it wasn't enduring at all. When I reached the osteria, my hair testifying to both weather and poor choices, the owner handed me a folded napkin. He shrugged the universal shrug of the man who knows neither why women cry nor why men act surprised when they do. La ragazza, he said, which seemed generous. By then I knew Hannah would have hated the diminutive, woman, please. But I kept the courtesy, la ragazza. The napkin was heavy with oil, the word Owen on the outside, like a tattoo gone wrong. I opened it. Inside there was a short note in a small hand. I have to go earlier. I cannot wait. Thank you for our nights together. Forgive me for all. H. The H was a gate swinging closed. I stared at the words as if language itself had wandered off. The waiter's mouth kept speaking Italian. Bora, brutta, pazienza. And I nodded as if I understood what it meant to be patient. I went outside into the wind's second act, and I tried to breathe. It is a poor party trick to read a note that sounds like goodbye and not collapse. I sent a message to her phone. Where are you? 3 dots became a new religion. They went away, they came back, the reply arrived. Bus station. Wait, I typed. Please. Dots. I can't. I ran, ridiculous word, but I did. Down Via di Cavana where the tourists pressed themselves into doorways, across Piazza Unità where flags snapped like impatient hands, to the station where everything smelled like diesel and longing, which is to say, departure. The bus to Ljubljana was idling. A woman with a red scarf kissed the air around another woman's cheek. A man smoked with the concentration of a saint. I didn't see Hannah. I didn't see her because she had left 5 minutes earlier on a bus I had passed without knowing. Later, she would tell me, in my imagination, because we never spoke again, that the owner of the osteria had said I was on my way, but she had already paid, already folded the napkin, already crossed her name out of the city. Her napkin note and the 2 words in the text, bus station, would rewrite the next section of my life with the weary authority of a bureaucrat. I would think of the verbs I still didn't know: to stay, to try, to wait, and wonder if my ignorance had finally come due. I went home and pressed the napkin into a book. The book I chose, and this will tell you everything, was a phrase book. I put the napkin inside at partings. It seemed appropriately theatrical, like seating a ghost in the front row of a show you don't actually want to attend. If the story ended there, it would be the kind of tidy heartbreak people recognize and admire at parties. She left him a note on a napkin, someone would say, snagging an olive as though grief were an hors d'oeuvre. It said, "Forgive me for all," which is really quite generous. And we would all nod at the grown-up posture of it. Forgive, release, go forth, be new. But the note did not end there. It slept. Years later, 5 to be exact, which is the biblical number of I thought I was fine until I wasn't. I found the napkin again while searching for my passport, which only tells you how far we can walk from ourselves and still manage to return. Time had made the oil translucent, the letters faint. It looked like something the sea had tried to eat. I slid it out and read it again. Heart doing the thing it does when it recognizes the old wound, like a former colleague. I have to go earlier. I cannot wait. Thank you for our nights together. Forgive me for all. I'd read it 100 times that first year, then half as many the second, and somewhere in the third, I decided it was either a blessing or a curse, depending on my sleep. I chose blessing because it allowed me to stop checking bus schedules. But now, older and inclined toward the dangerous hobby of mercy, I felt a small itch at the back of the words. It was earlier that bothered me. Earlier than what? I had always assumed earlier than planned, which implied that what we had, however miniature, had been meant to last at least past dessert. But the more I looked, the more I saw the inside-out logic of a new speaker. Earlier, like sooner, like before, like something else. And then there was forgive me for all, which I had always admired for its scope. No one asks forgiveness in the singular anymore. We prefer to carve it into manageable bites. Sorry for the thing I did after the other thing. Sorry for leaving wet towels of my feelings on your floor. But for all is a cathedral. It acknowledges what we cannot catalog. It also reflects a check habit I later learned from reading a book of letters. A generosity of apology, as though you could sweep a room with one long word. I held the napkin like a riddle and realized I was suddenly, unreasonably desperate to have it translated properly, professionally, by someone who did not consider Google an eager child, which is how I ended up sending a photo of the napkin to a woman I had recently met at a dinner party, a graduate student in Slavic languages whose name was too beautiful for email. I know this is insane, I wrote. If you have time or curiosity. She wrote back within the hour, the kind of promptness Americans mistake for love. Her response was not what I expected. She wrote, "It's idiomatic and a little awkward, but I think she means by earlier is ahead, like I have to go ahead. And the next line could be, forgive me for everything, or excuse all of it. But in context, it might even mean be kind about it, like asking the person to be gentle with the story. Also, thank you for our nights together could be thank you for the good time we were together. But it's more affectionate than that, like she is naming the togetherness itself as the thing she's grateful for, which is beautiful. The only thing I'm fuzzy on is I cannot wait. It could mean I can't wait for you, as in she has to leave now, but it also could be the flip. I can't be patient with me anymore, as in she can't bear to delay her decision. Hard to say without context. Context is the word that breaks your heart quietly. I wrote back, What would you say it means if you had to choose? She took a few hours to answer. A good sign in translation. Rushing is how you end up confessing love to cheese. Then, if it were me, I'd hear this. As I have to go on ahead, I can't wait. Thank you for our togetherness. Be kind to all of it. It feels like she's making a choice she doesn't fully want to make, but not because of you, because time and distance are real and also maybe obligations. Artists often have residencies with fixed endings or contracts that send them forward. Sometimes I cannot wait is not about impatience, but about having no room left to delay. I sat very still. Be kind to all of it. In my head, the wording had just changed the furniture of my memory. Where I had pictured a slam of a door, I now pictured a hand lingering on the doorknob. I wrote to the student, "Is there any chance that I cannot wait could be the opposite? As in, I can't wait to see you?" "Yes," she replied, "but then I have to go earlier would be confusing." Unless she meant I have to leave earlier than planned to make sure I see you. But then why say, "Forgive me for all"? Maybe for changing the plan? Again, hard without knowing more. Also, sometimes the tone is doing the work that grammar can't fix. Tone, the oldest liar in the book. I thanked her, paid her the price of a nice lunch, and went for a walk where all the trees had the exact number of leaves you would give a tree if asked. It was late November by then, the Bora less righteous, the city making its humble way toward Advent. The Christmas lights were being tested in the piazza. The star went on, the star went off. I thought of Hannah's hair blown into a shape that defied nouns. I've thought of the wrist bone she would cup with her opposite hand when she was nervous, as if checking her own pulse. I thought of the phrase she once typed under the table after we had kissed. In Czech, we say, "My heart is heavy." But I want it to be heavy like a blanket, not like a stone. We are taught to respect the finality of a goodbye. To go back later with a dictionary and a better attitude feels like cheating death. But people do not remember accurately. They curate. We choose the exhibit that flatters our courage and syncs with our friends' schedules. For 5 years, I had curated a version of Hannah's note that, while not untrue, had required less tenderness of me. It was the version that allowed me to roll my eyes and say things at dinner like, "Well, she said, 'Forgive me for all,' which I suppose is the residency equivalent of ghosting." I said those things because I wanted them to be true. I said them because certainty is a seductive drug sold over the counter of pain. I said them because it is easier to be clever than to be kind. Standing under the testing lights, I realized the note might have been less a farewell than a plea. Be generous to what we had, even in the telling. And then, the heresy. Maybe I had misunderstood the thing that changed everything. If you were looking for a happy ending, you have confused me with someone else. I did not track her down. Although, of course, I tried a little, the way you try to see if your house keys will open someone else's door, hoping they won't, and half hoping they will. I searched her name online, found a recital poster from Brno that could have been her or a cousin, or a forum in a language that turned my eyes into decorative objects. I found someone praising a violist with rare warmth. I wrote an email to the conservatory that never arrived anywhere, bounced back with the implacable echo of address not found. I did not fly to Prague, though I priced it. I did not learn Czech beyond a few phrases, though I tried. Děkuji, promiňte, zůstaň. Thank you, forgive me, stay. The truest thing I did was this. I took the napkin out of the phrase book and put it in a small frame with a cheap mat. On a card behind it, I copied the graduate student's gentlest translation. Be kind to all of it. Then I set it on my bookcase beside the sardine magnet, which had lost an eye and therefore looked both exhausted and wise. I told myself that if anyone asked, I'd say it was a prayer. And then, as one does, I tested the new foundation against the structure of my memories. What did it change if she had meant go ahead and not leave early? What did it change if I cannot wait was about her own heart rather than mine? What did it require of me, this revised script, this alternative notation with which to play our short symphony? It required me to consider that I had not been abandoned. I had been entrusted. She had handed me the story of us and asked me to be kind, which is harder, in its way, than being left, because it requires you to supervise your own cruelty. It required you to stop telling the version of events in which you are always the injured party with the flawless skin. This is not to say we would have ended differently if we had had a better app. Sometimes we use the wrong word because the right one scares us to death. Sometimes contracts or obligations are a polite mask for, I am afraid of how much you want me to stay. And sometimes, I have to go ahead really does mean just that. The program is over. The next recital is waiting. The calendar has already moved on. A mistranslation can be the hole in the boat or merely the cold wave that convinces you to swim. Often both. People like to say love is a language. They mean it's a private tongue whose grammar you can master if you invest in a good tutor and suspend disbelief. But love is less a language than a set of agreed-upon misunderstandings. You decide which errors are acceptable, which confusions you will wear like jewelry. You choose where to put the commas and where to leave the ringing dash. And if you are lucky or disciplined, you keep revising. I wish I could say I revised in time. I didn't. I revised like a man who has been given a museum after hours and finally realizes none of the guards are coming. The paintings do not forgive you. They simply remain. It is you who must learn to look long enough that the light changes. And yet, The napkin did change everything because it changed the question. For 5 years, my question was, why did she leave me? It was the kind of question that fertilizes one's worst crops. But after the translation, the question became, can love survive mistranslation? Which is a better question because it assumes love and invites you to honor the work both people did to find each other at all. The answer, I think, is yes. If you decide that surviving does not always mean staying. Surviving can mean not using the wrong word as an alibi to quit. It can mean writing a kinder version of the story when you finally have the tools. A few months after I reframed the napkin, someone I was seeing came over to my apartment to borrow a book and ended up staying the night. Because in middle age, we don't do so much hangout as we surprise ourselves. She was Greek, and when she spoke English, it was like listening to a waterfall attempt stand-up comedy. Exuberant, slightly mistimed, completely charming. We had been careful with each other, and then not. Morning found us in the kitchen where I was making coffee, as if coffee creation had ever made a morning less complicated. She walked around my bookcase and stopped at the framed napkin. "This is sweet," she said in a voice that promised to be honest without asking permission. "What is it?" I told her the story, the osteria, the wind, the bus station, the napkin, the translation. I did not make myself the idiot hero. I tried to be kind to all of it. When I finished, she looked at me over the lip of her mug and said, "You know, in Greek we have this word, metania, which means something like a change of mind, but more like a change of heart-mind, like the moment your soul pivots." "And the pivot is the translation?" I asked, because I am forever paying rent in metaphor. She shrugged, the magnificent shrug of a person who learned early that you cannot argue a mountain into moving. Sometimes it's the willingness to look again. We were quiet for a minute. The day moved itself forward. Somewhere on the street below, a dog barked with the conviction of a civic leader. She pointed to the frame. "I like that you wrote it down," she said. "It's like telling yourself the rules of your own museum." Rules of my own museum. I wanted to kiss her for that, and did. When we pulled back, she smiled the smile of someone who knows most of the answers are provisional. "You know," she said, "signomi," in Greek, is both excuse me and I'm sorry and pardon me. It's all one word. That's dangerous and very efficient. "We should put it on a napkin," I said. We lasted the length of a season and then a little more, which is both more and less than it sounds. There were tomatoes I remember and a bus I don't. We mistranslated plenty. Her remark about my beautiful average face remains a family favorite, and yet we keep the museum tidy. When it ended, we said the true things. And where the language failed, we hugged. This would be the place to admit that I sometimes still imagine the other bus station. The one where I arrived before she leaves, where I say the words that hold her another day, There, she leans her head to my shoulder and says, "Your city is blowing me away," which we both recognize as a better joke in English. We spend the extra day doing nothing important and everything lifelong. We shop for detergent. We fail to light the stove. We buy a charm at the market that turns out to be an amulet for sailors. She does not become my wife. I do not become her home. But we eat pears and their juice runs down our hands, and we say, "This is what it is to be alive." And for once, we do not immediately disagree. I allow myself that version so that I do not become the man who refuses any version but his favorite. Meanwhile, in this life, I keep the napkin with its polite plea, and sometimes, late, on the kind of week that makes a person consider a hermitage, I read it out loud. The words, chopped, sincere, marching, collect their meaning as they go, and I always hear again the graduate student's gloss, as though the ensemble were waiting for the soloist to land. Be kind to all of it. Stepping back into the bora, the city tugging me forward, I find myself pressing a hand to my chest without thinking. The napkin is framed now, resting on the shelf at home, but the gesture endures. A quiet vow my body keeps remembering, a hand to my heart. A reminder that some languages we may never master, yet meaning finds us anyway. In the pauses, in the mistranslations, in what we choose to carry forward. And that was the translation that changed everything. When Owen first asked me to write this story, he said he didn't want her to vanish twice. Once from his life, and again from memory. What you just heard was my attempt to give those words a place to live. In the conversation you are about to hear, Owen and I talk about how a single note and a single word can change the way we understand love, language, and ourselves. All names and identifying details have been changed for privacy. Owen, when you first reached out, you said something that really caught my attention. You wrote, "It wasn't a love story. It was a translation problem that dressed up as one." What made you describe it that way?
Well, I guess that's just how it felt. We weren't really speaking the same language, not just words, but everything. Emotions, timing, and maybe even hope. I think I was trying to say that what we had was real, but we never quite learned how to say it right.
That's such a gentle way to put it. In the story, you and Hannah communicate through little notes, translation apps, gestures, all those small ways of trying to bridge the gap. Did those barriers make it more special or more fragile?
A little of both. When you can't rely on words, you pay attention to everything else. The way someone looks at you, the pauses, the tone, that kind of focus makes things feel deeper. But it also means one wrong word can feel like an earthquake.
When you found her note again, years later, and realized that you might have misunderstood it, what did that moment do to you?
It knocked the wind out of me. For years, I thought she'd said goodbye, plain and cold. But when I had it translated right, it felt more like a blessing. Like she was saying, be kind to what we had. And that changed everything.
You told me that line. Be kind to all of it. It's actually one of my favorites. What does it mean to you now?
I think it means stop keeping score. Stop turning every love story into a winner and a loser. She wasn't the villain. I wasn't the hero. We were just two people doing our best with what we had. And sometimes that's all you can do.
That's such a beautiful kind of acceptance. Did writing, or rather hearing, your story told out loud help you find that peace?
Yeah. I think having someone else tell it, someone outside of my own head, helped me see it clearer. You wrote it the way it felt, not the way I'd defended it. And that made it softer somehow, more forgiving.
You said something in your first email that I never forgot. You wrote, I don't want her to vanish twice. What did you mean by that?
I just meant I didn't want her to fade like she never existed. You spend your life with people who change you, and when they're gone, you kind of owe them a little memory, Writing it down, letting you give it shape. It made sure she didn't disappear.
I love that. Do you think you understand her better now? Or maybe, do you understand yourself better?
Probably both. I learned that love isn't about finding the right words. It's about what you do when you can't find them. We were a translation that never quite finished. And that's okay.
That's such a gentle truth. You once told me you thought life keeps handing us the same lessons until we learn to translate them properly. Do you still believe that?
I sure do. Life's got a way of repeating itself till you finally get the message. Took me a few tries, but I think I finally did.
You said that telling this story helped you remember her honestly. Not as someone who left, but as someone who lived in your life for a while. So, Owen, if you could say one more thing to Hannah, what would it be?
I think I'd tell her I finally got the translation right, that I know now what she meant, and that I hope she's been kind to it too.
That's beautiful. Thank you for trusting me with your story.
Thank you for helping me say it.
Maybe every love story is a translation. Not from one language to another, but from who we were to who we've become. Sometimes the message gets lost along the way, and sometimes, years later, we find the right words waiting for us. Owen's story reminds me that meaning isn't fixed. It evolves as we do. And kindness, in the end, is its only kind of fluency. If you have a story that still lingers, something you wish you could say one more thing about, you can send it to me at SayOneMoreThingPod@gmail.com or visit ifIcouldSayOneMoreThing.com. Thank you for listening and for keeping the conversation alive. I'm Andrea Applewick, and this is If I Could Say One More Thing.